Compassion is the basis of morality, but it requires first the ability to feel. Arthur Schopenhauer. Emotional blindness is not about lacking feelings, it's about failing to see them clearly, both in oneself and in others. For many, men emotions are a distant noise, something to be ignored or overpowered. But Schopenhauer understood that this detachment comes at a cost. When a man disconnects from his emotional reality, he loses more than empathy. He loses clarity, depth, and authenticity in every aspect of life. The tragedy is that while men often pride themselves on being rational and unbothered, women and the world see the emotional blind spots they cannot. This blindness sabotages relationships, weakens personal integrity, and traps men in cycles of misunderstanding and isolation. In this video, we'll explore Schopenhauer's hard-hitting, inconvenient analysis of emotional blindness in men. You'll understand why ignoring emotions doesn't make you strong. It makes you blind. More importantly, you'll learn how to reclaim emotional clarity without losing your masculine edge. Subscribe if you're ready to see what you've been ignoring for too long. Like and stay until the end to break free from emotional blindness and regain your power. Schopenhauer's philosophy teaches that desire distorts perception, but few distortions are as insidious as emotional blindness. For many men, emotions are treated as inconvenient obstacles to logic, dismissed as irrational or weak. Yet this very dismissal blinds them to the subtle emotional dynamics that shape their lives. Emotional blindness is not an absence of feeling. It is a failure to recognize, interpret, and integrate emotions consciously. The man becomes reactive without realizing it, driven by emotions he refuses to acknowledge, yet subtly controlled by them. Schopenhauer would say that such a man is enslaved not by external forces but by his own unconscious will. This blindness often begins early. Boys are socialized to suppress emotions, to prioritize stoicism over sensitivity. Vulnerability is equated with weakness, emotional expression with loss of control. Over time, this conditioning calcifies into emotional illiteracy. The man learns to identify only extremes, anger, frustration, desire, while ignoring subtler signals like disappointment, insecurity, or fear. Schopenhauer's view of the will as an unconscious driver of human behavior becomes crucial here. Emotions, left unexamined, operate beneath awareness, influencing decisions, relationships, and self-perception in profound ways. Emotional blindness impacts relationships most visibly. A man who cannot read his own emotions struggles to understand his partner's. Miscommunication becomes constant. Emotional cues are missed, dismissed, or misinterpreted. What a woman perceives as emotional neglect, the man sees as rational. Detachment. Schopenhauer's critique of human interaction reveals the root of this disconnect. Each person projects their own inner state onto the world. The emotionally blind man assumes that because he has numbed himself, others should too. This creates a cold mechanical dynamic in relationships, devoid of empathy and true connection. Beyond personal relationships, emotional blindness erodes self-respect. A man who cannot process his emotions loses touch with his core values. He makes choices based on impulse or external expectation, not inner alignment. Schopenhauer teaches that clarity arises from self-knowledge, and without emotional awareness, such clarity is impossible. The man becomes fragmented, living reactively, unable to articulate why he feels restless, dissatisfied, or disconnected. His life becomes a series of reactions, not conscious actions. Moreover, emotional blindness fosters a false sense of control. By suppressing emotions, a man might feel composed, but this composure is brittle. Unacknowledged emotions accumulate, surfacing in moments of stress as outbursts, passive aggressiveness, or emotional shutdowns. Schopenhauer's insight into the will's hidden influence becomes evident here. What is repressed is not erased, it festers. Emotional blindness is thus not a shield, but a ticking time bomb, eroding personal relationships, professional integrity, and self-worth from within. The path out of emotional blindness requires courage. It demands facing the very emotions one has been taught to dismiss. Schopenhauer's method of philosophical introspection becomes essential. By observing one's inner life with brutal honesty, a man begins to reclaim his emotional vision. This process is uncomfortable but transformative. Emotional awareness does not weaken masculinity. It strengthens it by grounding it in reality, not illusion. The man who sees himself clearly, emotions and all, gains a depth of presence that reactive bravado can never match. Emotional clarity becomes his new foundation, not as a loss of control, but as mastery over self. While emotional blindness might seem like a strategy for maintaining control, its hidden costs are profound and far-reaching. Schopenhauer's philosophy teaches that what is repressed within inevitably manifests in distorted ways externally. For emotionally blind men, this means living in a constant state of low-grade tension, unable to articulate or even identify the source of their unease. They mistake numbness for strength, yet beneath the surface, unresolved emotions quietly sabotage their relationships, careers, and inner peace. The man who cannot feel fully cannot live fully. His experiences are muted, his connections shallow. One of the most immediate consequences is the erosion of emotional intimacy. Relationships thrive on mutual understanding, empathy, and vulnerability. Emotional blindness strips a man of these faculties, leaving his interactions cold and transactional. He becomes adept at managing logistics, providing materially or offering surface-level attention, but remains emotionally absent. Schopenhauer's critique of shallow societal interactions resonates here. Without emotional depth, relationships devolve into mechanical exchanges, devoid of genuine connection. The partner feels unseen, unheard, and emotionally starved, leading to distance, resentment, and eventual breakdown. Furthermore, emotional blindness compromises a man's decision-making. Emotions, when properly understood, are valuable signals that guide intuition, align actions with values, and warn against self-betrayal. Schopenhauer emphasized the importance of aligning one's life with reality, and emotional awareness is crucial to this alignment. The emotionally blind man, however, disregards these signals, relying solely on cold logic or societal expectations. This disconnect leads to choices that seem rational on the surface, but are internally misaligned, resulting in chronic dissatisfaction and a persistent sense of disconnection from oneself. Another hidden cost is the loss of authentic masculine presence. True masculinity is not emotional suppression, but emotional mastery. Presence is felt when a man is fully grounded in his reality, including his emotional landscape. Emotional blindness creates a facade of strength, but this facade is thin. Women, colleagues, and friends sense the dissonance. Schopenhauer's idea that the essence of reality cannot be concealed applies here. No matter how stoic the exterior, unresolved emotions seep through, undermining credibility, leadership, and attraction. Emotional blindness also fosters a dangerous loop of escapism. Unable to process discomfort, the man turns to distractions, overworking, substance abuse, constant entertainment, to avoid facing himself. These coping mechanisms provide temporary relief, but deepen the disconnect. Schopenhauer's teachings on the futility of desire highlight this trap. Chasing external distractions to fill an internal void only amplifies suffering. The man becomes trapped in a cycle of avoidance, never addressing the root cause of his discontent. Ultimately, emotional blindness stunts personal growth. Growth requires self-reflection, the ability to recognize patterns, learn from mistakes, and adapt. Schopenhauer advocated for relentless introspection as a path to wisdom. The emotionally blind man, however, remains stagnant, repeating the same behaviors, trapped in cycles of frustration and confusion. His inability to see himself clearly limits his evolution, keeping him confined to a shallow, reactive existence. The remedy is not emotional indulgence, but conscious integration. Emotional awareness, as Schopenhauer would argue, sharpens perception, deepens experience, and anchors a man in reality. By turning inward, confronting suppressed emotions, and learning to navigate them with clarity, a man regains control, not by ignoring his emotions, but by understanding and mastering them. Emotional. Vision becomes a source of power, transforming relationships, leadership, and personal fulfillment. One of the most common delusions perpetuated by emotional blindness is the belief in rational superiority. Many men equate emotional detachment with intellectual strength, believing that by ignoring feelings, they rise above them. Schopenhauer dismantled this illusion by revealing how the will, the deep unconscious driver of human behavior, operates regardless of one's conscious beliefs. The man who prides himself on being purely logical is often the most enslaved by unacknowledged emotions. His decisions, far from being objective, are subtly dictated by fears, insecurities, and unresolved emotional wounds he refuses to confront. This illusion is reinforced by societal narratives that idolize the rational man while dismissing emotional awareness as weakness. From corporate boardrooms to masculine role models in media, emotional suppression is falsely portrayed as discipline and leadership. Yet in reality, emotional blindness limits a man's ability to lead with empathy, connect with others authentically, and make decisions that align with both logic and emotional intelligence. Schopenhauer's assertion that ignorance of the will leads to suffering applies here. Denying one's emotional reality does not erase it. It only ensures it will manifest in dysfunctional ways. The man trapped in this illusion often finds himself puzzled by the outcomes of his relationships and professional interactions. He perceives himself as reasonable and composed, yet experiences constant miscommunication, conflict, and emotional distance from others. Schopenhauer would point out that this disconnect arises from a failure to perceive reality accurately, a blindness created by the will's hidden influence. Emotional cues which could offer valuable insights are ignored, leading to decisions that feel logical but result in unintended negative consequences. Furthermore, this rational superiority complex isolates the man from his own humanity. Emotions are not the antithesis of reason. They are essential components of human experience that, when integrated, enhance judgment and deepen understanding. Schopenhauer valued clarity of thought, but he also recognized that emotions, like desires, are inherent aspects of existence. To deny them is to deny a fundamental part of oneself. The emotionally blind man becomes fragmented, disconnected, not only from others but from his own internal compass. This disconnection fosters arrogance and emotional rigidity. The man believes he sees the world clearly, but in reality, his perspective is narrowed by his refusal to engage with his emotional landscape. Schopenhauer's philosophy teaches that true wisdom comes from confronting discomfort, not avoiding it. The man who rejects emotional reflection limits his ability to learn, grow, and adapt. He becomes trapped in rigid patterns of thought and behavior, unable to evolve beyond the confines of his self-imposed blindness. The path to overcoming this illusion involves a humble re-evaluation of what true strength means. Emotional awareness is not about being ruled by feelings, but about recognizing them as vital information. Schopenhauer would argue that self-knowledge, including emotional self-awareness, is the foundation of authentic power. By integrating emotional clarity with rational analysis, a man transcends the false dichotomy of reason versus emotion. He becomes capable of nuanced thought, empathetic leadership, and genuine connection, grounded in both intellectual rigor and emotional depth. Overcoming emotional blindness is not about becoming more sensitive or emotionally reactive. It's about reclaiming clarity of perception. Schopenhauer's philosophy offers a path that aligns perfectly with this goal: detachment from illusion, ruthless self-awareness, and alignment with reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. For men, this means learning to observe their emotions, not as threats to control, but as vital data points that reveal the true state of their inner world. Emotional vision is not emotional indulgence, it is emotional literacy. The first step in this reclamation is acknowledgement. The man must confront the uncomfortable truth that his supposed rational detachment is, in fact, emotional avoidance. Schopenhauer teaches that suffering is amplified by the illusions we create. Emotional blindness is one such illusion. By admitting that unprocessed emotions influence his thoughts, actions, and relationships, The man begins to dismantle the false narrative of emotional superiority. This act of honesty requires courage, but it is the foundation of emotional clarity. Once acknowledged, the practice of observation follows. Schopenhauer emphasized introspection, not to wallow in emotion, but to understand its nature and influence. The emotionally blind man learns to pause and examine his reactions. What am I feeling? Why am I reacting this way? Is this response aligned with my values or driven by unexamined fear? This process transforms emotions from unconscious drivers into conscious insights, sharpening the man's perception of himself and his environment. Emotional literacy also enhances a man's ability to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics. Women, in particular, are highly attuned to emotional subtext. A man who remains emotionally blind cannot engage in meaningful relationships because he misses these subtle signals. Schopenhauer's analysis of human interaction highlights how misperception breeds conflict. By developing emotional awareness, a man not only improves his relational intelligence, but also builds trust, respect, and depth in his connections. He no longer interprets emotional nuance as irrational noise, but as valuable information. Furthermore, emotional vision restores authenticity. The man who sees himself clearly ceases to perform for approval. His actions become expressions of inner alignment, not reactions to unacknowledged insecurities. Schopenhauer's concept of detachment applies here, not detachment from feeling, but from the compulsive need to manipulate perception. Emotional clarity empowers the man to act with integrity, leading to a more grounded, self-assured presence that others naturally respect. This process also fortifies emotional resilience. By facing emotions directly, the man builds tolerance for discomfort. Schopenhauer would argue that suffering is not eliminated by avoidance, but by mastery. The man learns to sit with uncomfortable feelings without being overwhelmed, to process disappointment, anger, or fear with composure. This inner strength radiates outward, enhancing his leadership, relationships, and overall life satisfaction. Emotional resilience becomes a quiet, unshakable confidence rooted in reality. Ultimately, reclaiming emotional vision transforms how a man experiences himself and the world. Schopenhauer's path is not about emotional dependency or hypersensitivity. It is about clarity, depth, and authentic engagement with life. The man who integrates emotional awareness into his philosophy of living becomes a force of presence, grounded in truth, free from the chains of blindness. In seeing himself clearly, he learns to see others clearly. And in that mutual recognition, real connection, leadership, and fulfillment are born. The journey from emotional blindness to emotional mastery is not about abandoning masculinity, it's about refining it. Schopenhauer's philosophy teaches that strength is not found in denial, but in understanding. For men, this means recognizing that emotional clarity is not a betrayal of rationality, but its complement. The man who sees his emotional landscape with precision gains a level of self-command that the emotionally blind can never achieve. He no longer fears emotions because he has learned to navigate them with intelligence and control. Emotional mastery begins with emotional ownership. Schopenhauer would argue that suffering increases when we blame external factors for internal turmoil. The emotionally blind man lives reactively, seeing emotions as something inflicted upon him by others. Emotional mastery flips this dynamic. The man assumes full responsibility for his inner state. He acknowledges his triggers, processes his responses, and chooses his actions consciously. This shift from reactivity to intentionality is the hallmark of true masculine power. With ownership comes emotional integration. Emotions, once seen as disruptive, are re-evaluated as essential data points. Schopenhauer's concept of detachment is applied here. Not detachment from emotion itself, but from the compulsive, unconscious reactions it often triggers. The man observes his emotions with curiosity, learning from them without being controlled by them. Anger becomes a signal for violated boundaries, sadness reveals unmet needs, and fear highlights areas for growth. Emotional mastery is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to interpret and respond to it wisely. This level of integration elevates the man's relational dynamics. No longer blind to emotional subtext, he engages with others from a place of empathy and clarity. He listens beyond words, responds with presence, and navigates conflicts with composure. Schopenhauer's insights into human nature guide this process. By understanding the will's hidden motivations, the man sees through surface-level interactions to the deeper emotional realities at play. This depth of perception fosters trust, respect, and influence in both personal and professional spheres. Emotional mastery also cultivates authentic confidence. Unlike the fragile bravado of emotional blindness, this confidence is rooted in self-awareness and emotional resilience. The man knows his strengths and weaknesses intimately. He is not rattled by criticism, rejection, or emotional turbulence because he has faced and integrated these experiences within himself. Schopenhauer's path of inner alignment becomes a lived reality. The man's presence communicates quiet strength, not because he postures, but because he no longer needs to. Finally, emotional mastery liberates the man from the endless chase for external validation. He no longer seeks to manipulate how others perceive him. His self-worth is no longer dependent on being understood, admired, or desired. Schopenhauer's philosophy teaches that peace comes from aligning with reality, not from bending it to fit one's desires. The emotionally mastered man embodies this truth. He engages with life and relationships from a place of wholeness, free from the compulsions of blindness and the anxieties of external approval. In the end, emotional mastery is not a destination, but a practice, a daily commitment to self-awareness, honest reflection, and intentional action. Schopenhauer's teachings provide the philosophical framework for this journey. The man who embraces it transcends emotional blindness, emerging as a leader, partner, and individual of depth, clarity, and authentic masculine strength. Emotional blindness is not a lack of feeling. It's a lack of seeing. It's the quiet, invisible disconnect that turns men into strangers within their own lives, sabotaging their relationships, their leadership, and their peace without them even realizing it. Schopenhauer's philosophy exposes the core of this condition. When we refuse to acknowledge the hidden forces that move us, our will, our desires, our emotions, we become their slaves. The man who prides himself on being unaffected, purely, rational, or stoically detached is often the one most controlled by unexamined emotional impulses. Emotional blindness is not strength. It is unconscious weakness. But here lies the inconvenient truth and the opportunity. By choosing to see, by daring to confront the emotions we've ignored, suppressed, or misunderstood, we reclaim the power they've quietly held over us. Emotional awareness is not softness, it is sharpness. It sharpens perception, sharpens relationships, sharpens self-command. The man who sees himself clearly, flaws, fears, desires, and all, gains a mastery over life that no amount of external bravado can match. This is not about emotional indulgence. This is about strategic emotional intelligence. Schopenhauer teaches that true freedom comes from knowing the forces within you, so they no longer control you in the dark. Imagine the strength of being unfazed, not because you're numb, but because you're aware. Imagine leading relationships not from fear of losing control, but from clarity of presence. This is the path of emotional mastery. This is what separates reactive boys from self-possessed men. Emotional blindness keeps you small, stuck in patterns you can't even see. Emotional vision expands your world, deepens your influence, and anchors your masculinity in truth, not illusion. You stop performing. You start embodying. You stop reacting. You start choosing. That shift, subtle, internal, powerful, is what makes you truly unshakable. And it all starts with the simple, radical decision to open your eyes. If this message resonated with you, if you recognize yourself in these patterns and are ready to reclaim your emotional vision, subscribe to this channel now. Hit the like button to support this journey of masculine self-mastery. And share this video with a brother who needs to hear this truth. Together, we're not creating emotionally fragile men. We're forging men of clarity, presence, and authentic power. Stop living blind. Start seeing yourself.